Have you ever wondered why there are different versions of the Bible? You might have seen a Catholic Bible, a Protestant Bible, and an Orthodox Bible and thought, aren't they all the same book? Well, yes and no. It's a fascinating story that goes back centuries, involving history, theology, and tradition. Today, we're going to unravel this mystery and explore what makes each of these Bibles unique. By the end of this video, you'll have a crystal clear understanding of the differences and the reasons behind them. So, grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into the world of Christian scriptures. First, let's start with the Old Testament, because this is where the biggest and most well-known difference lies. The core of the issue revolves around a collection of books often called the Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical books. Now, what are these? These are a set of writings, mostly from the period between the Old and New Testaments, roughly 400 BC to the time of Jesus. The story gets interesting when we look at how the early Christian church decided which books belonged in the Old Testament. In the ancient world, there wasn't a single universally agreed upon list of Old Testament books for Hebrew speakers. The most influential version for early Christians, most of whom spoke Greek, was a translation called the Septuagint. This translation, made a few centuries before Christ, was the go-to scripture for the apostles and the early church fathers. It included those extra books like Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, Baruch, and 1st and 2nd Maccabees, as well as additions to the books of Esther and Daniel. The early church widely used and quoted from these books, considering them part of their sacred scriptures. So, for over 1,000 years, the Christian Bible, for the most part, included these books. This is the tradition that the Catholic and Orthodox churches continue today. They refer to these books not as the Apocrypha, which can mean hidden or of questionable authority, but as the Deuterocanonical books. This term means second canon, not because they are less important, but to distinguish them from the proto-canonical books, the ones found in the Hebrew Bible. For Catholics and Orthodox Christians, these books are just as inspired and authoritative as Genesis or Isaiah. Now, where do Protestants come in? This is where the Reformation in the 16th century becomes a key part of our story. Martin Luther, one of the leading figures of the Protestant Reformation, wanted to return to what he saw as the original sources of the faith. When it came to the Old Testament, he favored the Hebrew canon, the one used by Jewish communities, which did not include the Deuterocanonical books. His famous principle was sola scriptura, or scripture alone. He argued that if the Jewish authorities at the time of the early church did unofficially include these books in their canon, then Christians shouldn't either. So Luther decided to move these books. In his German translation of the Bible in 1534, he took them out of their traditional places in the Old Testament and grouped them into a separate section between the Old and New Testaments. He gave them the title Apocrypha and wrote that they were books that are not considered equal to the Holy Scriptures, but are useful and good to read. He didn't completely discard them, but he did demote them. Following Luther's lead, most early Protestant Bibles, including the original King James Version of 1611, actually included the Apocrypha as a separate section. It wasn't until the 1800s that Bible societies, for economic and theological reasons, began printing Bibles without the Apocrypha altogether. This is why today, if you pick up a standard Protestant Bible, it will have 39 books in the Old Testament, while a Catholic Bible will have 46. So, to summarize the Old Testament difference, a Protestant Old Testament has 39 books. A Catholic Old Testament has 46 books, which includes the 39 plus 7 Deuterocanonical books, Tobit, Judith, Wisdom, Sirach, Baruch, and 1st and 2nd Maccabees, plus additions to Daniel and Esther. Now, what about the Orthodox Church? This is where it gets even more interesting. The Eastern Orthodox Church also accepts the Deuterocanonical books, just like the Catholic Church. They also base their Old Testament on the Septuagint. However, their list is slightly different and a bit more expansive. Most Orthodox Bibles will contain everything that's in the Catholic Old Testament, but they also include additional books. These typically include 1st Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, Psalm 151, and 3rd Maccabees. Some traditions within Orthodoxy also include 4th Maccabees as an appendix. So, the Orthodox Old Testament is the largest of the three. It is a testament to their strong adherence to the Septuagint as the authoritative version of the Old Testament. Okay, so that's the Old Testament, the biggest area of difference. What about the New Testament? Here, the news is much simpler. All three major branches of Christianity, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, use the exact same New Testament. It contains the same 27 books, from the Gospel of Matthew to the Book of Revelation. The canon of the New Testament was largely settled by the end of the 4th century, long before the major splits in the Church. There were debates in the early centuries about a few books like Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, and Revelation, but a consensus was eventually reached, and it has held firm ever since. So, when you're reading the Gospels or the letters of Paul, you're reading the same text regardless of which Bible you have. However, just because the books are the same doesn't mean everything about the Bibles is identical. Another key difference lies in translation and interpretation. Each tradition has its preferred translations. For English-speaking Catholics, popular versions include the New American Bible, Revised Edition or Nebre, which is used in mass readings in the United States, and the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition or NRSVCE. These translations are made from the original languages but are also reviewed to ensure they align with Catholic doctrine and tradition. Protestants have a vast array of translations. The King James Version or KJV is the classic, known for its beautiful, poetic language. The New International Version, or NIV, is probably the most popular modern translation, known for its readability. Others, like the English Standard Version, or ESV, aim for a more literal, word-for-word translation. The choice of translation often reflects a particular theological emphasis, whether it's on literal accuracy or ease of understanding. The Orthodox Church doesn't have a single official English translation. Many Orthodox Christians in the West use the New King James Version or the NRSV for personal study, often with a study Bible that provides notes from an Orthodox perspective. There is also the Orthodox Study Bible, which uses a new translation of the Septuagint for the Old Testament, and the New King James Version for the New Testament, along with extensive notes from the Church Fathers. Beyond the number of books and the specific translations, there's the role of tradition, with a capital T. This is a significant theological difference that affects how the Bible is read. For Protestants, especially those in the sola scriptura tradition, the Bible is the sole, ultimate authority for faith and practice. While they value historical teachings, the Bible stands alone as the final word. For Catholics and Orthodox Christians, Scripture is part of a broader stream of authority that includes sacred tradition. They see the Bible as the written part of God's revelation, but not the entirety of it. Tradition includes the teachings of the apostles passed down through the centuries, the writings of the early church fathers, and the decrees of ecumenical councils. For them, Scripture and tradition are not two separate sources but are intertwined, like two streams flowing from the same divine wellspring. This means that a Catholic or Orthodox Christian reads the Bible through the lens of 2,000 years of church teaching and interpretation. It's not just about what the text says to me, the individual, but what it has meant to the church throughout history. So let's recap the key points we've covered. The biggest difference is in the Old Testament. Protestants have 39 books. Catholics have 46 books, adding the 7 Deuterocanonical books. The Orthodox have the largest Old Testament, including all the Catholic Deuterocanonical books plus a few more, like 3rd Maccabees and Psalm 151. The New Testament is identical for all three groups, with 27 books. Finally, the traditions differ in their preferred translations and, most importantly, in how they view the Bible's authority in relation to church tradition. It's amazing how a single book can have such a rich and varied history. Understanding these differences isn't about saying one is right and the others are wrong. It's about appreciating the diverse ways that Christians have received, preserved, and interpreted their sacred texts over the centuries. Each tradition offers a unique window into the Christian faith. Whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, or just curious, exploring these different Bibles can deepen your understanding of history and theology. I hope this has cleared up some of the confusion and given you a better appreciation for the different Christian Bibles. It's a complex topic, but a truly fascinating one. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, Please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What version of the Bible do you read and why? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.